Welcome to this video tour of the historic L.B. Brown House Museum. The house is located in beautiful Bartow, Florida, Polk County. It was built in 1892 by a man who was born in slavery. Before we take the tour of the house, allow me to say a few words about the man, Lawrence Bernard Brown. Mr. Brown was born during slavery in 1856 near the town of Gainesville, little community known as Archer, Florida. Spent the first 9 years of his life in slavery. When slavery ended in 1865, Brown eventually migrated to Bartow, Florida, sometime around the late 1880s. He built this house for him and his mother in 1892. In 1909, Lawrence Brown married a widow named Annabelle Granger. Together, Lawrence Brown and Annabelle had 7 children. Brown's father was a plantation minister. His mother, Catherine Brown, was also an enslaved plantation person, and she was a Native American. So Brown was a very, very typical Floridian. What makes the Brown story so compelling is that Mr. Brown maintains daybooks or ledgers of both his business and personal activities. Here we have several of Mr. Brown's ledger books. This particular one, the entries begin in March 19, 1895. Brown detailed some of his business activities. And the ledger book continues on for a number of pages. So it proves who Brown was and what he was involved in. Although Brown never attended school a day in his life, he was an avid reader. Here we have his book of etiquettes, how to conduct yourself in various situations. It's entitled The Golden Way to the Highest Attainment. And in this particular book, Brown actually autographed. Now, he did not write the book, but he owned the book. And he actually signed his initials as in calligraphy, L.B. Brown, and he has a date, 1890. In addition to the well-documented ledger books, we have several artifacts that Mr. Brown left behind. This is the handle to one of Mr. Brown's personal umbrellas. It's made out of gold and mother of pearl. Now, Mr. Brown did not manufacture this handle, but he owned it. It gives an indication of his wealth. In addition to the umbrella handle, here we have a complete umbrella that belonged to Lawrence Brown. This handle as well is made out of gold and also ivory, whereas the handle is made out of gold and mother of pearl. Here we have a hand mirror that belonged to Mrs. Brown. It's made out of silver and gold. Now, this mirror was not silvered by Mr. Brown, but it was owned by his wife, Annabelle. Very beautiful, expensive hand mirror. The final item that we want to display is the pocket watch that belonged to Lawrence Brown. Here, this pocket watch has Mr. Brown's initials engraved in it, LBB, Lawrence Bernard Brown. This area marked the spot where L.B. Brown's workshop was located. The shop was approximately 20 by 30. It stood in this area. This concrete slab, the ramp, and this sign is about where the back door was located. In this workshop, Mr. Brown performed a number of tasks, one of which was silvering mirrors. He also sold Bibles. He repaired umbrellas and parasols. He did a variety of things. He counseled individuals, he loaned money, and he collected his rent. It was a combined office and workshop. As he exited the shop, he would then head on to the big house right next door. After I moved to Bartow in 1989, Bartow, of course, is my wife's home, I sort of stumbled upon the abandoned L.B. Brown house and we decided to form an organization called the Neighborhood Improvement Corporation of Bartow, Inc. Together with some other inspired citizens, we were able to acquire the abandoned home and restore it pretty much to its original 1892 condition. This historical marker lets us know that the house is on the National Register of Historic Places. It provides a snapshot of the history of L.B. Brown, indicates that the house was built in 1892 and some of Lawrence Brown's movement throughout his period of time, and the fact that the home was rescued by the Neighborhood Improvement Corporation of Bartow, Inc. We're standing at the northwest corner of the house, out to the front of the house, and the most decorative part of it. All of the trim, commonly referred to as gingerbread trim, was placed by Lawrence Brown. We had to replace some of the items, but everything that we replaced was according to Mr. Brown's design and construction. The height of the rail, the two-story verandas, everything was original. The design of the columns, etc. This is all Lawrence Brown design. And even the screen doors, those are original screen doors. In addition to building the house itself, Lawrence Brown also manufactured all his own bricks and blocks. Here we have a foundation pillar, the type that holds up the foundation of a home, that L.B. Brown manufactured at some point. The visitors will note that he has engraved in here his initials, LBB, Lawrence Bernard Brown. One of these pillars is actually now in the Smithsonian Museum of African American History in Washington, D.C. In addition to the home being on the National Register of Historic Places, the man, Lawrence Bernard Brown, has also received recognition as a pretty significant person. Here we see Lawrence Brown was designated a Great Floridian by the Florida Department of State. Here we are at the south side of the house. Perhaps the most interesting feature is the window that leads into the attic. It's called a Palladian or Surliana opening. It's a very beautiful window, and as I said, it's perhaps the most interesting feature of the south side of the house. As we began restoration of this semicircular ending to the driveway, we discovered through excavation remnants of Mr. Brown's beautiful brick inlaid driveway, remnant of which you can see made out of red and white bricks. Originally, this driveway ran all the way to the back of the property to a two-story barn, but we do have a fairly large section that is still intact. We're still at the south side of the house, and here we have the water well or the bucket well. That well is still very much intact. In fact, it's an underground cistern. About 15 or 20 feet below ground, there's a sealed concrete chamber that used to be fed from a downspout that connected to the gutters to the house. When Brown arrived here, this was a wooded area. After clearing this area of the trees, he utilized some of the pine tree stump or pine tree logs as part of the foundation to the house. There are actually 18 of these logs, 18 of these stumps supporting the foundation of the house. Here we are at the rear of the house, on the west side of the house, and even in the rear, Brown did not spare any trim. Here he added a beautiful trim at the gable part of the house. In addition to this, we also have the pump well. Not entirely certain why he had two sources of water, but he did. So we reconstructed the pump well. Whereas L.B. Brown built the big house in 1892, he actually constructed this bungalow around 1912. It was one of his typical rental units. It's estimated that Mr. Brown may have built as many as 50 to 75 of these throughout East Bartow. Although this is a replica of the original outhouse, this replica is actually on the location of the original outhouse. Also have inside the outhouse newspapers. And we explained to the visitors that that newspaper had two purposes. One was for reading. If you didn't have newspaper, then of course there were some other items that you might use for your necessities. But this is the outhouse. As we come into the home, we enter the hallway. The hallway is perhaps one of the most decorative rooms in the house, if we can call it a room. Along the stairway, you have beautiful hand-cut scrolls. Also along the side of the stairway, we also have remnants of the original wallpaper. In the upper left-hand corner of the wall as well, we have remnants of the original wallpaper. The wainscot is all original, as the chair rails. The mirror that's hanging on the side of the wall was silvered by Mr. Brown. You will notice that the mirror's frame is hand beveled. Also the beautiful door leading to the back hallway. On this other wall in the hallway, we have a collage of photos of pretty much the entire Brown family. That is to say, we have photographs of everyone except Mr. Brown's father, Peter Brown. On the top row, we have Mr. and Mrs. Brown in their younger years. On the second row, we have Mr. and Mrs. Brown as they aged. And then just to the right of Mr. Brown is his mother, Catherine. As mentioned, Catherine was an American Indian, married to a Negro named Peter Brown, who was Mr. Brown's father. On the third row, we have Lawrence and Annabelle's 7 children. On the bottom row, we have their only grandchild, Joe Tuggerson. It is interesting to note that of the 7 children, there was only 1 grandchild. All of the children are now deceased, including Joe, the grandchild. Joe was never married, did not produce any children, so there are no more direct Brown descendants. We're now in the large room on the first floor. Rooms of this size would normally be used for entertainment. However, the Brown family was not much for it by way of entertainment. And at some point, Lawrence Brown converted this large room into a bedroom for his aging mother, Catherine, who could no longer go up the stairs. But the room is very large. We have a cutout in the wall so that the visitors can see what the interior wall looks like. Also, we have a very decorative fireplace with a hand-beveled mantle. And then, of course, above one of the doors, we have the old transoms, as well as a transom operator. We're now in the parlor of the house. Again, we have another fireplace with a beautiful mantle. The 2 mirrors that are built into the walls were silvered by Mr. Brown. On the wall opposite the fireplace is a cameo shot of Mr. and Mrs. Brown. Also, we'll notice that there is a transom and transom operator above the entrance door in this room as well. Now we're entering into the dining room. The dining room is relatively small, but then again, the visitors will bear in mind that these rooms were used for the purpose in which they were constructed. When the family came here, it was to eat, not so much to lounge around. We're now in the kitchen. All of the furniture in the kitchen, as well as the stove, are replicas. Following the death of Mr. and Mrs. Brown, the kitchen had been modernized by the Brown children. However, we were able to acquire furniture that replicated much of what existed during the family's time. Above this wood-burning stove is a remnant of the original wallpaper. It's highly unusual that houses of this era would have kitchens that have wallpaper. However, this house did have wallpaper in the kitchen. As we go up the stairs, you'll notice this wide board. It's hand beveled both top and bottom. The room in the back, small bedroom, you'll notice that the walls are plastic. Of the 9 rooms in the house, 4 of the rooms have plastered walls. The rest of the house is wallpaper. Not entirely certain why Mr. Brown did it that way, but that's what he did. In this little back room, we will notice that there is a closet. It's somewhat unusual for homes of this era to have built-in closets, but at least 3 of the bedrooms have built-in closets. The other rooms would have had what is called a chifforobe. You'll also notice in the corners there's some little decorative knobs that Mr. Brown used to sort of soften up the edge. Leaving this small room in the back, we now enter the master bedroom. During the last years of her life, this is where Mrs. Brown slept because she was quite ill. Most of the furniture in here belonged to the Brown family. The mantelpiece is very, very decorative. We took liberty with the painting that we did, but all of the woodwork and carpentry was done by Mr. Brown. As we enter the front room, the smaller room, that some folks tend to refer to as a nursery because it's right off the mother's bedroom, the wall here is also plastered. The mantelpiece in this room is pretty decorative. This was where the younger girls slept. Again, you notice the corners, there's some decorative knobs that softened up the edges a bit. As we cross the hallway, there's a 4th bedroom upstairs. This is where the boys slept for the most part. This room is currently used for storage, but it's another bedroom, not quite as decorative as the others, I guess befitting bedroom for males. As we enter the porch on a 2nd floor veranda, you'll notice the gingerbread trim around the edge. It's all original. The balusters, both 1st floor and 2nd floor, were replaced during restoration because the original balusters were somewhat weak. But these replacement balusters are identical to the original baluster in height as well as in design. You'll notice over the triple windows in the front of the house, the scroll, the decorative scroll above the window is actually carved into the wood. And then as we look off the balusters on the south side of the house, you can see again that brick inlaid driveway. Across the street looking west was an actual railroad bed. It was one of the original railroad beds that came through South Florida. The view from this 2nd floor veranda is quite inspiring. I really like coming up here and sitting. With my understanding that his daughter, Lavinia Thomas, in her later years, spent a lot of time sitting on that porch, waving to the passing traffic.